everyone, welcome back to Featherstitch House. My name's Rebecca and each week on this channel I make videos about embroidery and textile art to help you get creative. If you're new here, you're so very welcome, and if you are a returning visitor, thanks so much for coming back. Your support really does mean the world to me. We're in week 2 of our November panel for this year's Winging It project. And last week we started taking our thread painting to the next level by taking away the coloured background and relying on our stitching to fill in all the space. Now, as I said last week, the best way to start this is to choose a really textured creature or surface to start thread painting, and what better than a hedgehog to get us going. So last week I showed you how to draw the hedgehog, how to turn that drawing into an embroidery pattern and transfer it onto your fabric, and we started stitching in using stitches to create shape and contour and texture. It did look quite generic at the end of last week. It could have been the face of any kind of UK mammal. So you could adapt that face shape to make a fox, a badger, even a deer, a mouse, anything like that would work in a very similar way. The thing that's going to make it really come to life as a hedgehog is the spikes, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So gather your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. So this is where we got up to last time. We started with our sketch and then turned that into a pattern for our embroidery, and then we basically worked dark to light and built up layers of tone on our hedgehog. And because hedgehogs are so textured, they're spiky, and even their faces are kind of, they are spiky, they're sort of softer spikes, but the texture is still there. We don't have to worry too much about blending really smoothly, and so this is a really good second stage thread painting task. So back in October we made our mushrooms and we used felt underneath our thread painting to fill in all the gaps, and this is the next stage. So we're just stitching on fabric. I've got my wadding behind, but we are practicing building tone and shade to create the shape of the hedgehog. Already we've got this idea that the nose is coming forward. We've shaded around the side of the nose. They are darker anyway, but it also creates this idea of the nose coming forward. And we've put 2 tiny little specks. So I didn't do this on camera last time, but these aren't French knots, these are just tiny straight stitches in a cream thread, and I've just made sure that they're balanced so they're in the same place on both eyes, and that stitching in front of the ear brings the spikes forward, pushes the ear back, and that's where we left off. So now we're on to the fun bit, and we're going to create our spike. So we're going to work dark to light again, and we're going to use some of the techniques we used in our sketching to help create this sense that these are spikes and not hairs. So we want them to look a little bit haphazard and very spiky. So there's a couple of tricks that we're going to play to make sure that happens. I've got all my threads that I was using last week here, and I'll let you know what I'm using as we go through. I'm starting with 2 strands of Anchor 382, which is a very dark brown. It'll look quite black on camera. It's like the colour of dark chocolate. It's a very intense dark brown. So these stitches we mostly kept fairly short, maybe a centimetre. We did vary them a little bit, but we're going to go much longer with these, and they're going to tuck in amongst the hairs at the top of the head. So I'm going to tuck my needle in and just start making some longer stitches. So that's maybe about 2 centimetres. I'm going to start in the centre and work my way out, and although I've got my guidelines, I don't want all of these to be on the same angle, so we are kind of fanning. We do want them roughly to go around the hedgehog like that, but not in a regular sort of hands on a clock kind of way. So they're going to be roughly fanning, but not perfectly. So here, because I've angled this stitch over to the left a little bit, I want this to be on a different angle, and so if I make it a bit longer, that is going to cross over that previous stitch, and that's the kind of thing that I want to happen. So we'll just put a few more of these on, just so that you get the idea. So some will be much closer together than others, and you don't have to go back down to the hedgehog's head every time you start to stitch. You can start from the top of the stitch if you want to, so that's bottom to top, and then rather than wasting loads of thread on the back, I've just come down a little bit and I can go top to bottom. I'm going to go around the ears as well, so just exactly as if that ear wasn't there, I'm just going to tuck my needle in at the edge of the ear and create the stitch. So what we don't want is to make our stitches behind the ear as long as these stitches here, because we've got to imagine that these spikes are starting from the head of the hedgehog but just behind the ear. So we don't want to make these really long, because we're going to get a funny shape on our hedgehog if we do. Now our hedgehog is kind of curled up a little bit. It's going to be tucked in to some leaves which we're going to put on later in this November series. So we haven't got to worry too much about getting the perfect shape of the hedgehog, but if you want to make a more realistic hedgehog that isn't surrounded by leaves, what you want is to do a sort of half moon like that. So if I show you a picture, it's a bit crumpled, but if I show you a picture that I've printed off Google Images, I will try and find this picture and put a link to it in the description below. You can see here we've got a sort of semi-oval here. It's not a semicircle, it's a semi-oval, and it's much paler down here. So you could do a hedgehog, his little foot's here. You could do a hedgehog that's more visible if you want to, but we're going to bury our hedgehog in leaves, so it's going to be covered up a bit like that. So I'm only going to focus on this little bit here. I've run out of thread already. Just as a tip, don't be tempted to get really long strands of thread to work with. It's better to start new pieces of thread than spend all your time undoing knots and tangles, which is what will happen if you start with a great long thread strand. So slow and steady. It's not the most exciting stitching because we are just doing lots and lots of straight stitches, but the excitement of this piece comes from watching our hedgehog come to life as we sew. Okay, you get the idea. He's already starting to look more hedgehoggy. So I'm going to carry on all the way around to the other side, and I might do a second layer and then we'll come back and layer up our next shade of brown. Hope that makes sense so far. Okay, so I've gone round and I've gone round a second time doing lots of crisscross stitches. If I come up close, hopefully you can see a little bit better. So not every stitch goes back down to the head on that second layer, and just like in our sketch, I've got quite a lot of crosses in there now so that it's looking more like spikes rather than hair. So I've got a lighter shade of brown now. This is Anchor 1088, and what I'm going to do is go round again and start looking for spaces, because we don't want him to look sparse. Hedgehogs are very spiky and their spikes are quite dense. So similar process, I can go a little bit further out with this colour, and I'm looking for gaps in between the spikes where the white fabric is showing through. So sometimes I'm going to need to tuck right into the face again, and sometimes I'm just filling a gap. But these stitches can extend out a little bit further, and this is all building our texture and tone as well, making our hedgehog look dimensional rather than flat. So we don't want him to look like just a solid flat ball. We do want him to look round. So I hope everyone's well. Thank you for bearing with me last week with my late video because of the show. I had tried so hard to get everything done before I went away, and I got everything filmed and thought I would be able to do the editing while I was at the show, but it was so tiring. And when I got back to my sister's, I was staying with my sister, and when I got back in the evening, it was all I could do to keep my eyes open, to have some dinner and have a bit of conversation. And a couple of times I just fell asleep on the sofa, and she had to wake me up and encourage me to go upstairs and actually go to bed. So I just couldn't manage it, and I got to halfway through Saturday and thought, I just need to accept that this isn't going to happen. And I know that everybody's so lovely, they will completely understand and just bear with me. So thank you so much. And if you haven't seen part one, because I didn't upload on Sunday, I will link it at the top of the screen here, but the playlist will be on the end card of this video, so you can go back and check that out if you need to. So thank you as well for all the messages of support and people asking how the show went. It was really good, really successful. Thank you to all of you who stopped by the stand to say hello at Leicester and at the NEC. It was just so wonderful to meet some of you in person. Thank you for bringing your Winging It project as well. So I saw the most amazing Winging It book, and back from 2022, just so beautifully stitched. It put me to shame, really. I don't know if you realise that all of this is improvised, so I do try and show as much of the process in these videos as possible, and I've only just got a basic idea of where we're heading when I start filming. I haven't practiced it or planned it particularly in advance, so what you see on screen is me working out the panel as I'm going, and so sometimes I'll finish it and wish I'd done it slightly differently, or wish my stitching was a bit neater, or sometimes I think that if I'd not been filming I'd have been able to be more precise and much neater, and so it really makes me happy when I see your work in response to the videos be so much more meticulous and careful and so beautiful, and it just goes to show that most of us just need a prompt and a little bit of a steer and we can create the most amazing things. So yeah, just thank you so much. Felt very loved over the last couple of weekends. It really blows my mind, and there were a couple of times where I had to go and have a little moment up the corner because I was just so moved by the lovely things that you said. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm also delighted that so far people don't seem to be too intimidated by this panel. I think in the past, if I'd suggested that we were going to do thread painting, lots of you would have thought, oh, I can't possibly do that. But your enthusiasm so far seems to suggest that there's a collective growth in confidence as we've gone through this year's project. So we've just tried out loads of different techniques and we've built up to this kind of stitching. And just so that you know, I don't do this kind of stitching very often. I'm not particularly somebody that just loves thread painting and is always doing projects like this. This is just for you. But I think my confidence has grown in my thread painting and in stitching like this, and it's really encouraging that so many of you feel much more confident to take on a project like this than maybe you did at the beginning of the year. So I also sometimes feel really daunted. I got halfway through the face last week and thought, oh, what have I done? It's no one's going to like this, and maybe it's going to be too hard. And so I get daunted as well and feel a bit panicky and wonder if I've bitten off more than I can chew. And so don't think that I just approach these projects with absolute confidence. What I have become confident in is knowing that it is just fabric and thread, and it really isn't the end of the world if it doesn't look perfect and if it doesn't go according to plan. I can either start again or I can just keep stitching until it works, and I can cut little bits away if I need to, but I haven't really unpicked anything so far. I've just layered up stitches and hoped for the best. And I think once you've got a couple of basic principles, you can really make it work. So I'm just going to dome him up a little bit higher, just at the top here. Oh, I've caught my... hate it when that happens. It's one of the reasons I don't often stitch in a hoop, but because we're using straight stitches so much, it's really easy for the fabric to get caught and puckered up. So I'm just dealing with some of the perils. So when you are stitching with fabric that has got corners, you can often stitch them in at the back, so just make sure you're keeping them out of the way. Yeah, so I just want him to be, I don't want him to be perfectly round, so just at the top here I want it to bow up a little bit, and we're going to come in with another shade of brown in a minute. Just remembering to keep these stitches a little bit haphazard. I hope you can see how this is the next logical step. So doing a creature that is so textured is going to allow us to not be completely perfect in our thread painting. We can just sort of not worry too much about making all the stitches lay against each other, because the unevenness in the stitching is exactly what we need to make it work. I do like how hedgehoggy is looking. I'm going to carry on with my second shade of brown, fill in this space. I might take it out a little bit further around the edge. These are our guidelines, so I might just go out a little bit further, and then I'll come back and show you what happens when we put in the next shade. So the next shade I'm going to use is actually a DMC shade. It's 3860, and that's going to start bringing in a little bit of depth. So the more shades we add, the more depth we're going to create in our spikes. So that's where we're going next. I'll be back soon. Okay, this is where we're up to. So I've been around with my second shade of brown, and hopefully you can just about see that I've extended that slightly lighter brown out beyond the dark brown, and I've gone around the bottom a little bit just to blend with the hedgehog's face. Now over on this side you can probably see I've started adding in my next shade. So I'm using DMC 3860 and still in 2 strands, and now I'm adding some shorter stitches, still quite higgledy-piggledy, but I'm kind of blending out that very dense dark brown. So you can see around here it's very densely dark brown, and now I'm putting in some little marks that are making it look like the spikes are going back. So let me show you how I'm doing that. I've got my needle threaded up here, so I'm starting at the edge and I'm putting in a shorter stitch, maybe about 1 centimetre, and I'm just working my way around, making sure that I'm not working in straight lines that are radiating like that. So already I've gone a little bit higgledy-piggledy. I'm trying to be a bit closer to the camera just because the colours are so similar. I want you to be able to see. So let's go quite diagonal with this one, and let's come back the other way. So I'm trying not to think too much about what I'm doing, just so that the stitch kind of lands where it will. So that's some stitches in the edge there. Then I'm going to come down a little way, and I don't want to create harsh lines where my stitches begin and end. So I'm just putting in some stitches that go in different directions, but I want them to kind of overlap. So I've got 2 stitches there. I'm going to come up halfway between. So I've got a stitch here and a stitch here. My needles come up halfway along those stitches, and I'm just going to put another stitch in. So some of them can be a little bit longer, but you definitely don't want these to be as long as the dark brown stitches that we've been doing. So that's worked back my next row, and then I've got a little bit of white showing through there, so I'm going to put another stitch in there, and then I want to work into the face a little bit, because we're going to kind of blend that a little bit more. That line between the face and the spikes is a little bit harsh at the moment, so we're just going to blend that back out. So I don't want my spikes to be going really wildly diagonal, so I don't want them sort of jutting off at really strong angles, but I don't want them to be radiating in the way that the brown ones are. So we're breaking up that smooth dark brown area. Because we filled in all the white spaces, it's started to look quite smooth again, so we're going to just break that up with these mid brown lines that are going to bring back in the spikiness of our hedgehog. So I hope you can see how that's working, and that's going to work all the way around, and I'm going to fill in that space over on the right hand side like that. DMC changes colour a little bit depending on how the light is landing on it, so these stitches look a bit lighter, but hopefully if I move it around you can see that those spikes are all the way around. So I'm going to fill in the rest of that, and then I'll come back and we'll add our finishing touches to the spikes. I'll show you how we're going to blend it out really nicely. Here we go, that's him with his spikes, and I've got a little bit of Anchor 392 here. So this is one of the colours we used in the face, and I've just threaded up 2 strands because I'm just going to go around the edge of the face, and I don't want to go right in. I want to just leave some of that dark, and I'm just going to put in some quite small stitches in amongst those dark brown strands there, and that's going to help blend out the face so it's not quite such a stark line. So they don't all have to be tiny, but we want to leave some dark around them. So you can see there I've got dark brown all the way around that little stitch, and just going to pop another one in there. So these are maybe 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre long, and it's just going to help blend out that face so it doesn't look like he's wearing a coat. We don't want him to look like he's wrapped up in a woolly coat. So I'm just dotting them here and there, every now and again a very small stitch, and then I can put a bit longer one every now and again as well. I've been digging around for some hedgehog poems, as you seem to really like my little bits of poetry that I throw in every now and again. So I've got one ready for next week's video, and we'll see what else I can find along the way. I haven't done tons of searching, but I'll see what else I can find. People ought to write more poems about hedgehogs, I think. So I suppose this is not unlike seed stitch, but we're not going quite as random. So I've just run out of thread. I'm going to finish the rest of that round. Bring it up, you can see those little stitches. I'm going to finish the rest of that round, and then I'm going to go round again just in the same way, working my way out a little way to the edge, and he is looking really quite spiky now, and then we've got one more finishing touch. So I'll put those in and then I'll come back and show you our last little step. Okay, we're nearly there. I hope you'll agree he's looking super spiky. He's making me smile. Cute. Right, I've got some much paler thread now, so this is Anchor 391, and I also have a very pale grey which is Anchor 397 to hand, because we're just going to add in, let me just show you what I mean. So the very tips of hedgehog spikes are much paler, and so what we're going to do is come in around the outside and just add in some pale, where should we start? Let's start over here. I just want to add in some paler spikes around the outside. So similar to what we've just done, you can go a little bit bolder with these, so a little bit longer, and we're just going to add some highlights to the top. So stitches about 1 centimetre, maybe 1/4 of an inch, just filling in any spaces. And blending out that harsh line at the edge. So again, we don't want to be too regular with our stitches. Every now and again you can put a little cross or go at a slightly different angle. but we're just lightening up that dark around the edge and adding to the sense of spikiness. So all we've done here are straight stitches. There is nothing complicated, and we've just trusted the process of stitching and layering up colour to create the texture on our hedgehog. And it's magic really, isn't it? It's just simple layers of colour added as if we were sketching. So we're doing something very similar to what we did last week when we sketched our hedgehog, putting in our little sketchy lines to create that spiky texture. And it's such a safe creature to try. I suppose you could do a porcupine. I don't know whether they're hibernators. We don't get porcupines in the UK, but you could do a porcupine in very much the same way. You probably need to make your highlight stitches a little bit longer because the spines are much longer. But it would work in exactly the same way. Now I think that needs a little bit more highlight coming in, so I'm just going to keep stitching. I'm going to need a new piece of thread in a second. I'm not going to go all the way around to the side. I just want this top bit to be a little bit more highlighted. I've gone a stitch too far there, but we'll finish the thread with that stitch. It's blended quite nicely at the bottom. I'm quite pleased with the way that looks. I can just put these stitches in, working backwards and forwards from the head out to the edge of the spiky area. And like with all our other layers, I don't want my stitches to be too regular, too sort of radial. We're just building up that spikiness, adding our highlights. So I hope you are going to have fun with this. I've had a lovely time stitching this and just chatting away with you, because there's not a whole heap to think about in this process. You can be really mindful as well. So I think we're going to hit all the buttons with this one. It's easy, it's mindful, and you get to see a super cute little face appearing before your very eyes as you stitch. I'm so looking forward to seeing hedgehogs popping up on my feed. I might be going a bit far with that, that's okay. Just trying to blend out some of the lines a little bit. So there's our little hedgehog friend finished. I've taken the hoop off and just given it a bit of a press so that he is sitting nice and flat, and that hoop has really helped keep our fabric really nice and flat. There's no puckering at all around him, which is exactly what we want. So he is a little bit round, it's a little bit neat around the edge. I'm not too worried about that because we're going to put him in a little bed, so a lot of this edge will be covered up. If you just wanted to stitch a hedgehog by himself, I would make this a little bit more uneven around the edge and allow some fabric to show through at the edges, so have some slightly longer stitches going out, and that's going to help with the spikiness of the hedgehog. I hope it's shown you that this process of thread painting doesn't have to be super difficult, and if you want to take your stitching to the next level, then a really textured creature is the way to do it. It's a really good next step once you take that background colour away. So I can't wait to see your versions of our little hedgehog friend. If you want to post to our private Facebook group, the details of that are down below in the description. If you haven't joined that yet, you don't have to pay anything to join. You just agree to the group rules and put in a request, and I'll approve it as soon as I can. You can also post to Instagram, use hashtag FSHWingingIt24, and don't forget to tag me at Featherstitch House so that I am more likely to see your work. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week stitching your little spiky hedgehog, and I will see you soon in the next video. Take care. Bye.